There we are. Thunder in the background. If it starts lightning, we'll cease videoing. Look, a common phrase we hear is charity begins at home, question mark. Or does it, question mark. First of all, let's look at the situation in Australia in 2026. We have 32,000 registered charities. That's one charity for every 7,000 Australians. We have a population of approximately 27 million, which is 0.3% of the 8.3 billion people on planet Earth. That's 0.3%. We live on a resource-rich continent. We export agricultural products, meat, wheat, barley, sunflower oil, canola oil, and the list goes on and on. So we are not a poor country. In comparison to many other places on planet Earth, we are rich. But there's only one problem. And that's the fundamental problem which we have in Australian society today, something we've had since Federation in 1901, before Federation. That's inequality. Inequality. You may have noticed when you listen to private radio or commercial radio or public radio or television or go on the net, there is a plethora of organisations asking for your dollar. Now, it's understandable. Charities like Médecins Sans Frontières or World Vision or other charities which are raising money for people overseas, especially people in war-torn situations. Whether it's Yemen, whether it's Ukraine, whether it's Gaza, whether it's the West Bank, whether it's northern Nigeria. Totally understandable. But it's shameful that in this country, we have this very rich country. We have registered charities raising money to send Australian children to public schools. We have registered charities trying to provide mental health support for an increasing number of people in this country. We have registered charities trying to provide emergency accommodation for people who are experiencing homelessness. Currently over 25,000 Australian children are experiencing homelessness. How can we find ourselves in this situation in 2026? The Albanese-led Labor government has a historic majority and a very sympathetic Senate. How can it be that in 2026, 1/3 of the population relies on a social security benefit to survive? How can it be that 1/3 of the population cannot deal with a domestic emergency like the failure of a refrigerator because they have no resources? The problem is simple. It's terribly simple. We need registered charities to provide basic necessities like food for an increasing number of Australians because of the growing structural inequality in this country. If there's one sovereign nation state on planet Earth which does not need charities, it's Australia. Now, I'm a great supporter of charities, financially and also philosophically. But it pains me to see that so many charities are now trying to raise funds to provide basic services which the government should be able to supply in a country as rich as Australia. Because what this does is diverts money from overseas charities which are trying to keep people alive, provide basic shelter, basic medical care in the most extreme circumstances, whether it's an environmental disaster or whether it's war, where governments don't have the resources or the ability to provide for their population. This is not Sudan. This is not Gaza. This is not Yemen. This is a rich country with 0.3% of the world's population. And we're seeing more and more and more charities being registered to provide basic resources for citizens and permanent residents in this country. The globalisation, corporatisation, privatisation and deregulation revolution has stripped away gains which were made through decades, if not centuries, of struggle, where people forced the state through protest and through reform and through revolution. They forced the state to change its direction. Instead of just being interested in maintaining those in power by using their monopoly on the use of force to maintain the status quo, hundreds of thousands, not millions of people all over planet Earth have died in that struggle to force the state to take an increasing interest in the welfare of its citizens. We are at a critical juncture in this country's history. The failure of capitalism, private investment for private profit, is obvious to everybody. The dilemma is that Parliament no longer reflects the will of the people. Parliament has become little more than a rubber stamp to ensure the growing inequalities which exist in this country continue to exist. Nothing highlights this more than the housing crisis. As I've said over and over again, the way to resolve the housing crisis is to increase public housing. But because of ideological considerations, what we are seeing is the privatisation of the public housing sector. We've seen the privatisation of essential infrastructure. We've seen privatisation of the aged care sector. We've seen the privatisation of early childhood development. We've seen the privatisation and demutualisation of the financial sector. We've seen the privatisation of telecommunications. We've seen the privatisation of essential scientific organisations like like CSL, the Commonwealth Serum Laboratory, and the list goes on and on. And we continue to think that by giving money to charities in this country to resolve issues which should be resolved by government will somehow ameliorate the situation people find themselves in. I mean, I'm sure you're all familiar with the old adage, give somebody a fish and you feed them for a day. Teach them how to fish and there's the possibility they may become self-sufficient, both in the short term and the long term. The analogy is very simple. Parliament does have the ability to redistribute wealth. For far too long, we have allowed Parliament, the legislative agenda, to be directed by that 1% that own the means of production, distribution, exchange and communication, and the 8% who have the disposable income to take advantage of this country's investment-friendly laws to enrich themselves at the expense of providing basic services. We have extraordinary resources in this country, natural resources, coal, gas, uranium, iron ore, bauxite, diamonds, gold, rare earths, nickel, chromium, and the list goes on and on. And what do? We allow private corporations to dominate the marketplace and pay minimal taxation. Ultimately, the type of society we create and the type of society we live in is not just determined on the creation of wealth, but it's determined on the redistribution of wealth. Anybody can create wealth if they have a monopoly in the country on a particular field of human endeavour, especially if they're funded by taxpayers' money. Nothing highlights this more than the renewable energy sector. Obviously, we need a renewable energy sector because climate change is real. The increase in carbon dioxide due to human activity is real, irrespective of what the buffoon in Washington thinks or says. Ultimately, we're going down the same cul-de-sac. We are allowing the private sector to dominate renewable energy production. Not only to dominate, but to be awarded billions of dollars of taxpayers' money to assist that industry. We saw this in the privatised aged care sector, where the increase in wages to workers is paid for by the government. We saw it in early childhood development. We've seen all the problems which are related to privatisation. We've had more than enough royal commissions to tell us in which direction we're going. And the important thing is that if we don't make these wholesale changes, the amount of human distress, anxiety, reactive depression, violence will increase in the community as we see today. Because there never will be enough police to police a population which is polarised, which is being torn apart by insignificant issues like a person's religion or colour or the clothes they wear. So charities, the increasing number of charities highlights the failure, the total failure of governments, whether it's a Labor government or a Liberal national government, to look after the interests of the citizens. The tragedy is that somehow we think blaming the other, the person who's different, is going to resolve our problems. Our problems are not related to our differences. Our problems are not related to migration. Our problems are not related to the fact that it's a multicultural society. Our problems are directly related to the increasing inequalities which are existing in the society and the inability of government to do the most important thing, and that is look after the interests of its citizens. Look after the 0.3% of the Earth's population which lives on this continent. For far too long we have ignored reality. For far too long we've blamed ourselves, we've blamed the other. Somehow we think we're not efficient enough, we're not working hard enough. The fact is that change is necessary, radical reform is necessary. And if Parliament is unwilling to make that reform, they need to be dragged kicking and screaming to the legislative arena to ensure that everyone in this country doesn't need to rely on a charity to look after their basic needs. That doesn't mean charities aren't doing a good job. But as I said before, all a charity can do is provide a fish for a day. Government legislation provides the framework where people are taught to fish. It's only through government legislation, through radical change, that the problem we have inherited in 2026, which is now the second quarter of the 21st century, will be resolved. That's why I encourage you to join public interest before corporate interests. I've been involved in many organisations over the last 57 years. I've been surprised at how little interest there is in putting the interests of the many before the interests of the few. Until we are willing to put the interests of the many before the interests of the few, nothing will change, inequality will grow, and we will need more and more and more charity to just survive on a day-to-day basis.